Today's Daf is Daf Kuf. That's a round number. By Monday, we'll be finished with this parak. It's Hashem. So we're here on the top of Daf Kuf. And the Mishnah says, V'chein chaticha shel nevela. So the Mishnah has different cases where you have a small slice that fell into a whole pot. And that small slice was asur. Like, for example, you had a slice of nevela or a slice of a dag tome, a non-kosher fish, or you had the case of the giranosh in the yerech, and in all these cases, the Mishnah says that it's asur. So the Gemara says v'tibato beruba. Why are you saying that if I can't identify the non-kosher slice of either meat or giranosha or fish, that therefore the whole taroves has to be thrown out? It's all usher. Why not just simply apply the halacha of rov? The Torah says achrei rabim lahatos. So if you have one piece of non-kosher meat that fell into two pieces of kosher meat, and now you can't identify the non-kosher meat, then the Torah says rely on rov. That's called yovish b'yovish. So now the Gemara is going to introduce two principles that undermine the halach of bittul. The first principle is called something that's counted. What does that mean? Let's say, for example, you sell items by numbers, and that's osi leminyan. This is a Gemara at the beginning of Masechta Beitza, and it gives a certain chashivus to the object because it's counted one by one. You don't sell it by weight or an entire bag or something like that, but rather you sell it by number. It's a bushel of apples or 10 pieces of sliced meat. And the Gemara in Beitza records a machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan as to how to interpret a Mishnah at the beginning of Masechta Orla in the name of Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir, when he speaks about a davar shebeminyan, that which is counted and is sold by number, and it's not bottle in a taroves, he says darko limonos. It's generally counted by the individual item. And Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish have two interpretations of Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's called es shedarko limonos. In other words, you would never think of selling it by any other method other than by number. And Reish Lakish says, kol shedarko limanos, as long as sometimes you count it, and it's commonly counted, even though sometimes you would sell it by weight or another method, nevertheless, it's already considered, according to Rabbi Meir, darko limanos, and therefore it's not bottle. And that chashivus is mafkia, it undermines the law of bittul. So what do we do with these cases of slices of meat that fell into a tarovis, slices of non-kosher fish? According to Reish Lakish, who says that as long as it's quite common to sell it by number, like for example, you sell a number of slices of fish or meat, then we apply the principle of Rabbi Meir that it's not bottle. And that's the underlying interpretation of our Mishnah. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who says shaninu, that when does Rabbi Meir classify the Iser as darko limonos? That's only es shedarko limonos. Es means it's always counted. Michael Meimer, what are you going to tell me in the case of slice of meat? Sometimes you have 10 slices of meat, you count it by number, and it's 10. Sometimes it's 2 pounds of meat or 5 pounds of fish. So therefore, it's not, according to Rabbi Yochanan, davar shedarko limanos, and therefore it should be batel like any other tarovas of bittel. It doesn't have that chashivus. And the Gemara answers now we have to introduce a second principle that undermines bittul, and that's chaticha ruyul iskabed. Hoil v'ruyul iskabed lifnei liskabed ba lifnei ha'orch. Meaning, if you have guests, you would give them fish, you would give them meat, you give them, it's sliced up and it's ready to be cooked or roasted, and that's how you treat your guests. So that gives a chashivus. But let's say, for example, you had some very small slices of meat or fish. You would never serve that to a guest, nor is it a birya, which we'll soon see that the reason why Gid Anasha is not batel is because it's a birya, and we discussed this yesterday. And those are cases where you apply bittul. But in our Mishnah, we're talking about larger slices of fish or meat that fell into a taroves, and the iser is, if it's not eshedarko limonos, but it's a chaticha ruyul iskabi lifnei orchim, and therefore it's chashivus and it's not batel. Utzricha. Now, why does the Mishnah have to tell me that there's no bittul, both in the case of the yerech where you cooked the yerech together with its gid, and in the case of slices of a dag tome that fell into a tarovas of dagim tahorim? The iyashmin, I need both of them. Had I only known the case of gid anosh mishum deberyahi, aval chaticha, but if I have a slice of meat, that's not a birya, it's not a full limb of an animal. Emelo, I would say no, then it could be batel because it doesn't have that status of a birya. V'yashmin and chaticha, and if you told me about a slice of fish, then I would say that's because it's chaticha ruyul iskabed lifnei orchim aval gid anosha. Nobody would feed gid anosha to his guests. It's hard like wood. Emelo, therefore I would say the gid anosha should be batel in the yerech. And the answer is no. It's got the status of a birya, and a birya is not batel. And if you can't identify and remove the gid, then everything is us. Now again, if you could identify the gid anosha and remove it, or identify the fish that's, let's say, a treif of fish, and remove it from the tarovas, then I apply the dinim of bittul. Then I have only the tam, and the tam will be batel b'shish. And now we have the famous drasha of Rabba bar Chana. Now, what Rabba bar Chana wants to introduce here is the following. You cooked non-kosher fish, a slice of non-kosher fish, together with kosher fish, but there are other ingredients in the pot, and they're all heter. You have liquids in the pot. The Gemara is going to talk about gravy, sediments, slices of all together. So chaticha shel nevela shel dag tame, if a non-kosher piece of meat, nevela, or a non-kosher piece of fish, slices that fell into a pot and were cooked together with heter, eno seres ad shetitein tam berotev ubekipa ubechatichos. So it's when we're calculating the nesinas tam, let's say if it's a small piece of fish, or if you were able to identify that fish which was from a non-kosher fish, and then you removed it, and all you have to do is tam, then when calculating the tam, and you're looking at the kosher elements that are in the pot, then you calculate all the elements, the slices of fish, the gravy, the sediments, which is like an accumulation of spices and particles at the bottom of the pot. So that's Rabba bar Chana. Now, just making myself a mental note, if we have a few minutes at the end of the shir, I want to go back to the principle of Yavesh b'Yavesh and Bittul b'Rov. In any event, let's go on now. Oki Rav Amora Alei V'Darash. In other words, when Rabbi Bar Bachana gave this ruling in front of the Beis Medrash, they had an Amora. He was like the loudspeaker who would project the voice of Rabbi Bar Bachana. And in doing so, he would also clarify if there was any ambiguity. Kevan shenosan tam b'chaticha, chaticha atzma naseis nevela. Oh, seres kol chatichas kula mipnei shein mina. We have now a principle which is known by an acronym in the yeshiva world. It's called Chanan. Chanan stands for Chaticha Naseis Nevela. And what happens now is that there's Taruvas number 1 and Taruvas number 2. In Taruvas number 1, the slice of nevela or dag tome that fell into this pot was large enough to give off a tam. Let's say it was a ratio of 1 to 59. So the tam of the basar tome or dag tome now spreads throughout the pot. So let's pick out one slice of meat or fish from the pot, which was originally heter, but now it's carrying inside of it the tam of Isur, because it was cooked together in the same pot with a large piece of meat. When I say large, I mean relative, meaning to the number of 1 to 60. Now, you take out that piece of meat, and it's awesome. Now it falls into a second pot. And there's meat of heter, etc., in the second pot. How much do I need in the ratio of 1 to 60 in order to be matir the second pot? Do I calculate it by the amount of tam that's being carried by this piece that was in the first tarovis? Or do I calculate it by the entire piece of meat? And that's called chaticha nasis nevela, which means that even though this piece of meat is heter in and of itself, but it's carrying within it the tam of Isur, and that's why it's asur. Now I consider the entire piece of meat, its full volume, as Isur. That's called chaticha nasis nevela. Nevela here is just a choice of one word for any word of Isur. So now in the second tarovas, I'm going to need 60 times, not the balua, the tam that was absorbed in this piece of meat through the first tarovas, but rather to the entire volume of that piece of meat. But now, what we just said makes sense if in the second tarovas we have what's called min b'sheino mina. So let's say the first piece of meat fell into a tarovas of soup, liquid, sediments, gravy, whatever you have. Then we would need shishim against the entire piece of meat. But let's say that now that piece of meat from the first tarovas, which has a tam of the Isur of Dagtome or Basa Nevela, whatever it might be, now it falls into a pot that has other pieces of meat in it. Well, guess what? Now, Chaticha Nas Nevela tells me that I need a bittul of min bimino. And we just finished saying that min bimino lo bata. So now, based on the drush of Rabbi Bar Bachana, we come to two chumras. Chumrah number 1 is that in a mixture of that first piece of meat that absorbed the tam of Isur into the second tarovas, I'm going to need shishim against the entire piece of meat if it's min b'sheino mino. And chumrah number 2 is if that piece of meat from the first tarovas that received the tam of Isur falls into a pot of other pieces of meat, then I'm going to apply the chumrah of min b'mino eno bata. And I'm assuming now that the piece of meat is large enough to feed your guests. So it's a chaticha rulis kabed. And in a chaticha rulis kabed, we suspend the halach of bittul, and therefore it asks. Amalei Rav Safra Abaye, michti. Now, we're talking about Uki Rav Amora alei. So again, chronologically, it's like Rabba Bar Chana is an early generation, and Rav is going to appoint an Amora to project the halacha. And now Rav Safra, in a later generation, says to Abaye, Rav Kimand Omra L'Shmaita, isn't Rav basing himself on one opinion that min b'mino afilu belef lo bato, Rabbi Yehuda? He's basing himself on Rabbi Yehuda's shita that min b'mino lo bato. Now, if min b'mino ain't a batel, so forget about Nesinas Tam. The whole concept of Nesinas Tam, and you're trying to figure out whether you calculate, according to Rabbi Bar Chana, all the sediments and the gravy and the liquids and so forth and so on. Forget about all that. My area, Kinos Tam, you're going to tell me that what? That Rabbi Bar Chana said, whether or not it's no Saint Tam, forget about that. I feel Kiloros Tam Nami. Forget about it. You have meat in there. Meat in meat is min b'mino. And Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that min b'mino ain't no butter. Amalei, Sabai responds, Hochmais Kina Ksharim V'Silka. The reason why the calculation of Shishim and Tam is relevant is because he identified the piece of non-kosher meat or non-kosher fish, and he removed it from the pot. So therefore, I don't have the principle of Rabbi Yehuda of min b'mino afilu belef lo batel, because min b'mino and lo batel means when I can't identify where is the Isser. But in this case, I identified the Isser, I removed it. That's called Kodev Vesilko. And now I apply Bittul B'tam. So that's the explanation for Rav Shita, that in the first Taroves, we have to evaluate whether or not the piece of meat of non-kosher meat that fell into the Taroves imparts its tam, and do we have shishim, and how do we calculate the shishim? And all that is because he identifies the Isur, the dag tomei, and he removed it from the Taroves, and all you're left with is tam. That's Abai. That's Rav Safra Abai. And now we get to Rav.